Hello, everyone. And huge thank you for joining us today for discussion on high cost of AI maturity. This is a lead dev online panel discussion created in partnership with Coder. The discussion will last roughly 45 minutes. And then after that, myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your question in the panel Q&A channel. For those who are joining us live, we will be dropping like a link in the chat. It's really a great community of engineering leaders supporting and learning from each other. So please join. We may also have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get them, if we can, toward the end. Let's start with some introduction. If not, you're gonna get bored. So my name is Simone, and I'm head of engineering at Crack Technology here in UK. And today I'll be joined by Michaela, Kate, and Eric to share their experience and insight. And I'll ask you each one of you to introduce. Let me start with Michaela. You go first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super excited. I love the topic AI and how this reshapes our work environment. A little bit about myself. So I have been focusing on developer experience, developer productivity, code reviews for a long time already. And well, this is, I think, the most exciting time in my career now with AI changing and rattling through our engineering practices. I'm a researcher by heart and a developer by heart. I really value empirical findings, data-driven decisions, but also very much human-centric approaches, right?
Thank you. Kate, can you go next? Do you mind?
I'm Kate. I'm the author of The Engineering Leader, which is published by O'Reilly. I'm a fractional CTO at Twill, and I also am building the platform DOI Your Career with my friend Jean Su.
Awesome. Eric, please go next.
Yeah, good to meet you all. I'm the field CTO for the EMEA region at Coder, based in London, and the author of the AI maturity model, of which we're sort of speaking to today. So representing Coder, where we're building the AI development infrastructure, which includes cloud-based development environments and the platform layer, as well as AI governance for those agentic workflows. I started out about 6 years ago as the founding sales engineer. And I'm quite hands-on with customers to this day, serving mostly regulated industry. So that's really the lens of which I will speak through. And what's really sort of exciting to me about this conversation and sort of the market today that we're in is the chat is now about how do we move from just AI co-pilots to running these agents safely. So keen to discuss that here today.
It's fun. And this is really like a perfect segue for me. So just for the audience, just to contextualize a bit what we're going to talk about. So my take is that most of us have gone through the first hurdle. So engineering teams are using AI day-to-day, probably, code completion or local agents. The honest question is whether that is actually changing what we ship. For example, in my organization, weekly after hit is probably like 98% across all AI tools last month. But is it a useful signal? Adoption number don't tell us anything about whether we're getting better at our work. And that gap between adoption and impact is what I think we mean for AI maturity or immaturity, if you like. We don't want to use AI just for the sake of it. So what do we need to do to bridge that gap? How much does the environment make the difference? Is it the tooling? Is it about the culture? Is the way of working? Is the code? Or at least which part of that make the biggest difference? So I really want to dig into this. How to self-assess where our team actually is, what it takes to move you to the next step, and see how it goes. I think I want to start with a bit of a scene setting question. And Michaela, I think you would be perfect for this one. So is it valuable to measure adoption? What are the challenges? And is it higher or is better? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like it, and it's let me start like this, right? If your goal is to know how widely, how strongly AI is used in your org, I think adoption metrics are a clear signal on that, right? So it tells you whether or not this is used, depending a little bit, like it's also not always seamless and not always straightforward, right? But let's say if we have some good metrics around that, it could tell you that. But they don't really show you anything about productivity, right? Neither about return of investment. I think there's a lot of FOMO going on in AI, right? So everybody wants to jump on it. And that's because, especially the large organizations that sell us AI, make these strong claims about AI adoption and productivity gains, for example, right? So if this is what you're interested in, then well, adoption is not the right metric to look, right? But it's a good metric also if you want to know the level of experimentation or learning that's happening, I think, right? So if devs are using it, using the technology, they will get familiar with it in one way or another, right? Like it also could show you, for example, if there's friction or challenges that they are experiencing, right? So if you see that your adoption numbers are really low, you can also compare that with baselines, in other organizations, data that are out there. Then it could actually show you that maybe there is some challenges that you have to dig deeper. Could be also like trust or policy problems. But the metrics itself doesn't tell you anything about, what's actually going on, right? So yeah, it's one metric, right? It's easy to get to. Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people are pulling those numbers. But yeah, if you want to understand if AI is the right fit or the problems that you're experiencing or, productivity gains, then obviously adoption metric doesn't really tell you anything about that.
Okay. And the other thing that I think is interesting to talk about is that for me, adoption is a developer experience metric, not necessarily like a target, or it shouldn't necessarily be a target. So that's something we want to make sure to add. But once, just to follow up, and maybe Katie, you can help me with this one. Once weekly active usage hits saturation in a team. So where we got like, I don't know, we got like above 90% now. So I feel like this is stopping being a useful signal of progress. Also, what the next headline number you should be looking at instead? Or what kind of things we should see like going up or down?
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer this question, you have to come back to like, what is the purpose of a team? Which I don't think, like, I feel like in the ZERP era, it's like there was this vanity metric of headcount, and then a manager existed to be an abstraction over that headcount. And so those vanity metrics are gone, but we haven't actually replaced them with something useful. And so I think like a team exists for a purpose. And the clearest articulation of that purpose is they're supposed to deliver some value to the business, right? And I don't think we knew how much teams were delivering value before often, but now, like, I think that metric becomes critical, right? And so the whole premise of AI and like why companies are willing to do things that seem like objectively unhinged in pursuit of it is because AI adoption should result in a step change in productivity outputs, right? And what is the productivity? That's the delivery of the value to the business. But then on the other side of that, and this is what developers talk about a lot, is they're like, okay, you might get that step change upwards, but what about the possible step change downwards in reliability, right? And so those are the things that need to be managed, right? But you have to know what they are. If you didn't know what your reliability metrics were before, now you're having a worse time. If you didn't know what the goal of your team was before, now you're having a worse time. And so I think you have to come back to these like very foundational definitions of the value of a team and say, are we delivering more value net, right? Which is the value to the business minus the cost to the business, which is the reliability issues.
Can I jump in here? Well, metrics, I've been leading the research behind DevX, the developer experience platform that measures a lot of things, right? So, and I totally see what Kate is saying, right? If you don't have a baseline, how are you going to compare? How are you getting worse? Are you getting better? But maybe measuring return of investment, right? Measuring the impact, right, that has on your business is really, really tricky. But what we can do quite nicely in the engineering space is measuring our engineering systems, right? The health of our code base, the developer experience, be it how fast our CI/CD pipeline is, right? Friction in those processes. So even though I think like this would be the ultimate goal, there's a lot of research and a lot of attempts to really measuring the real impact that you have, with changes in technology. Maybe a first step, and I think a lot of companies are not there yet, is measuring your engineering system, right? Your processes, your teams, the deliverers that you have around that, the experience, the developer experience that you that you also ship with your systems and the processes that you build.
Yeah,
I agree with that up to a point, but it's not true that we can't measure the value of the developer team to the business. Like, this is literally what financial statements do, and the expectation of financial statements has shifted, right? And so revenue per developer, for example, like, there's supposed to be a step change in revenue per developer, in part because it pays for this tooling. And so, yes, we can measure the developer experience, but I think, like, it's time for engineering to be a little less insulated and be like, our value is, whatever system we're building. And instead, we need to be real. Like, our value is whatever the value is to the business. And that should show on the financial statements.
Yeah, and just to speak from the market perspective, Michaela, you mentioned it's difficult to measure ROI. That's what I've seen speaking to large enterprises, where they have a hard time understanding, what that developer productivity metric looks like and what is the actual bottom line number to the business. Ideally, yes, we want to create a value per developer head and what that means to the business, but I think enterprises are still struggling with determining what that metric looks like. And it's really a shifting goalpost now, because sure, you can previously measure engineering processes like the amount of pull requests created, lines accepted, and ultimately time to market from a product perspective. But are you measuring the right things, and is that actually tracking with the business? That's a difficult question to answer.
I think it's also a little bit of a mindset thing. I really have a hard time, and I think we are pushed into that direction, that engineering is more and more seen as a cost center instead of a value center, right? And I think that's a very dangerous thing to do for a lot of other things. Even making this transition happening, as soon as you look with this perspective, with this lens on your employees, right? Like, cost center, I think it's very different and very difficult, and we have to be very careful about that, right? Often is if when you're measuring something, what you're measuring changes, but not because, the underlying work really changes, but because of the measurement that you're doing, right? And there is a lot of literature on that, a lot of science on that. Once I'm starting to probing exactly what's going on here and there, right? Behavior changes, and very often not in the right direction, right? So I'm careful about that. Obviously you can measure everything if it's purposeful, if it really makes sense, if the proxies really tell you something is a different story. I think a very tricky story. But what is quite real is as soon as you start measuring, behavior changes, right? But not for the sake of improving really the processes, but more to satisfy whatever metrics or goal you're actually putting towards that, right?
Yeah, I feel like we can do like a full session on this. I'll be
Only
honest.
that, yeah.
I have so many things to add, but I'll refrain myself. Let me thank you all. Eric, let me follow up on something that so we talk about like standard productivity metrics and so on, but what do you have any experience of what's the most damaging form of AI immaturity, if you like, you have seen that doesn't show up in standard productivity metrics? Meaning, like something is going right, but it doesn't show in your metrics.
Yeah, that's, I guess, something I would like to call latent risk, right? It's sort of, okay, at the top line, we're seeing some form of productivity, but is it the right metric that we're measuring against? And with AI now coming into the picture, right, you could almost determine that maybe the value is not necessarily in the artifact, such as, pull requests or lines of code changed or time to merge, but it's actually in the skill set of the developer. And what I mean by that is, for example, what would be problematic is if we're measuring by a total number of lines of code generated. Of course, that's going to go up into the right with AI. AI spits out a lot of code. It's well known to do that, but that's also increasing the cognitive load on the human who is tasked with reviewing the AI code, right? And so the higher skilled the developer, technically the greater value that they have, because they can course correct and review that code with better results, right? So ultimately, if your engineers can't explain the code that was shipped last week, then the productivity number that you have potentially is incorrect.
Yeah, I have a spicy take on AI slop, which is it's what people call something when they know that they could have got the exact same output out of Claude. and it's not valuable to them. But if you can kind of train it to produce, like the people who I think are having tremendous value with AI have tuned it to be an amplifier on their judgment, you know, to Eric's point about skill. And then I think the other side of it is the people who have not tuned it, which I think is understandable. We haven't been doing a great job of helping people really adapt and learn these new tools. It's just been this like FUD and panic going on, right? Like they're being forced to use them. They don't add any value on the output, but the output tends to be really long, and that just wastes a lot of people's time. And then it also impedes adoption, right? Because it makes both the person using the tool and the tool itself look a bit stupid. And so then people who do have the judgment to say not ship something like that end up kind of increasing their resistance to it.
Certainly, and as well, AI, as you mentioned, right, can output pretty much anything, but it doesn't necessarily answer the question, are you building the right thing? And are you building it well, right? And that's determining what is correct to build is very much a market and product design and orientation conversation by humans rather than AI.
That's fair.
Yeah, actually coming back to like a good thing to measure, like one of the things I personally look at is how often does that Claude MD change? Because that is a measure of like how many improvements are we making to the system we're using to build versus just what we're shipping on the system itself.
Thank you. This is quite insightful. Let me move one step ahead and so we talk a bit about like how we're thinking about evaluating where we are as an organization. That again is probably a problem that you need to sit down and think hard. But what are the things that we can do to progress it? So let's assume that you got this. You have the right things set up to measure if you go in the right direction or not. What do we do? And so code review for me coming to my mind, and Eric as well mentioned it. So code review is one of the practices that most exposed by AI in a way, as almost like being described as the new bottleneck, as if. What does a health team practice look like now? And how is that different from 2 years ago, Michaela? So is that, what do you see?
I'm super happy to take that question. Code reviews has been an interesting practice, right? I've been giving workshops on code reviews for many years now. But now with AI, somehow it's completely, the new workways that people are setting up are completely falling apart once they are hitting code reviews, right? And I think one of the reasons is that we are confronted with larger PRs, with more PRs, right? We can generate code in seconds, but we still have or need the same amount of time to build a mental model about that, right? To verify it. And so at one point or another, within this, development life cycle, we are confronted with the realities of human capacity and human capabilities, right? So what can we actually meaningfully review, understand, give input in, judge, right? And I think this is where everything rattles a little bit. And some people are very, very afraid because their productivity gains that they, have by speeding up the code generation, right? Like this task, I think, 14% of a developer's workday, right? Now only takes like a fraction of that. So now you want to, weave that through the development cycle, and the code review somehow makes a stop there and say, no, this takes as long as it took before, maybe, let's say, right? I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing, right? The question is more, what can we do with this time that we are saving, for example, on the code automation part to produce even better output, right? Maybe we are still taking like this 14% of your workday on the code generation part, but we are reusing that so that the output that hits, for example, code reviews is already much better. And I think I see already patterns emerge into that, right? So I see something when I look at code reviews. We before talked about code reviews mainly when it's a peer-to-peer review, right? But I would say there's a first review cycle, right? That happens already between the dev and the agent, not a peer-to-peer, not a human-to-human, right? So the developer that works with an agent collaborates with the agent. Maybe some people call it pairing, but I don't see it as pairing because you're not there when it writes the code, right? It's not this pairing experience. It's more like, well, maybe you give it a plan or a prompt and it makes a plan and then it generates the code. This is an instance, right? Sort of. So you have the code there. It's actually a review, right? So you look through the code, and then, this is, I would say that's the first review cycle, and this should become a very strong cycle. And here we can use all the AI, all the machine power that we have. That's not only Gen AI, that could be also static analysis, right? Tests. So you have to really, invest heavily in this verification part, right? So to make sure that you can actually take them or make the most out of AI, right? So this means that really upping your game in automated checks, they should be in this first review cycle. It's not, you don't need any other humans for that. It's the agent and it's the developer, and they go through it. Ideally, the agent itself is wired towards those automatic checks, maybe, MCP server or other technology that you want to use for that, right? So the agent actually can trigger that, has access, sees what's happening, can adjust on that, right? So you're already increasing the quality output. And then the second layer is peer review. But here I think the focus should change, right? So away from this low-level inspection, maybe not every generated code, has to be looked at, but a different focus, right? There are things that machines are weak at: intent, validity of the approach, architecture, maintainability, maybe something that's, specific to your organization, domain knowledge, right? Could be also accident prevention, especially in high-risk areas, right? So I've been teaching risk-based reviews for years now, right? Where we really analyze the risk that's behind a code review and then dedicate more or less of our time on that. And I think this becomes even more crucial, right? Some organizations do that already. Automatic Meta, for example, has some risk score, for example, that you apply to output that's generated. And so that drives you. And I think maybe if I know I'm talking a little bit long, I will try to keep it short at the other parts. But I think what's also interesting is that I see that the artifacts are maybe different, right? So I don't think it's only the code that we should look at, maybe also the artifacts that the agent produces, right? So maybe artifacts that were produced in this dev agent cycle, right? That could be, again, the prompt or the plan, exposing to others the verification loop that you already did. What did I already check here, right? And then lastly, I think one big trap that I see people fall into is this large PR trap, right? They think that because it's so easy to generate now, large PRs are acceptable. But you have to actually fight this, right? So large PRs means that even if we are completely agentic, let's say in the inner loop, right? You have to produce that input, and that has to be high value, right? The specification, and you have to verify the output, right? And so the larger that whole thing gets, the more it falls apart from a quality perspective, I think, right? So all in all, I would say that healthy teams really have more engineering discipline, right? They need really more engineering discipline, not weaker one. And this will amplify, and this will also help with code reviews, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that being said, right, I like to say that AI already amplifies the systems and structure of your software development lifecycle that you already have in place, right? So AI will make sure that you are well aware of the quality of your CI/CD pipeline, right? Are you testing the right things? Do you have the right checks in place to ensure that code quality downstream? And I've even seen AI being used to help reviewers on that cognitive load, right? Maybe sub-agents that are spawned to look for very specific parts of the changes that were made, whether it is, testability, architecture, any duplicate code that was generated, right? And so that at least points the human reviewer in a specific direction of the code changes to make their review more efficient. So I guess you could almost say that AI could be used to help with the expanded amounts of cognitive load that AI already generates.
Thank you. Eric, while I have you here, I have a question for you. We talked about remote agents and autonomous workflow, think a bit out of reach. This was the premises of something that we said before. So what investment do teams systematically underestimate before they're ready for that leap? So, we know that it's something that every company probably should think about, understand, but is that what is in the trying to achieve that people miss?
Yeah, it's the platform itself. And what I mean by that, specifically the development environment in which the agent is going to run, right? That is the baseline. That is the first step of the inner loop process before any code is generated and before it makes it into Git and ultimately CI/CD and downstream into production. I think over the last year, it's been nice to run agents locally. You just have one Claude Code instance on your machine. But in an enterprise context, you're going to need to run tens or hundreds of agents in the background, and they're going to need access to that enterprise data and context that might not necessarily be available on that local machine. As well, that local machine is static from a compute perspective, and it might require reconfiguration of packages and dependencies for that agent or a set of agents to be productive over the course of several different types of projects. So what that informs is these remote agents need a reproducible and ephemeral and policy controlled development environment. So what that looks like in practice is moving the environment off of that local machine and into some form of centralized development environment infrastructure. Ultimately, if there's a backlog of trying to get an environment stood up from a human perspective, you can only imagine what that backlog is going to look like with an agent trying to get access to an environment to do the work and complete the task. Additionally, think about the identity problem, right? Agents need scoped and short-lived credentials and not borrowed human tokens that might live on the local machine. And so you can deliver those types of agent-first tokens in more of that centralized infrastructure. Additionally, when we talk about governance, these agents also need observability. So you need full audit trails of not only the changes that were made, but all of the tool invocations and prompts that were sent to the agent. So think of an LLM proxy or AI gateway that we're starting to see come to market, right? Light LLM has their own, Vercel has their own, Coder as well is going to market with one. Ultimately, regardless of which vendor is chosen, you still will need some form of that gateway to implement that level of observability to meet governance standards for agentic coding. And then as well, you need these environments to be reproducible, right? So agents are going to fail in a variety of different ways that are frankly non-deterministic. And if you're unable to reproduce that environment quickly, you won't be able to reproduce the failure. So what we see are customers now coming to us and other players in the space and saying, we need to standardize our development environments and move it into the cloud where our source code and data and other pipelines live.
That's quite insightful.
Can I add something completely different, like a complete different
Sure.
perspective? I agree 100% with what Eric said, right? But a very different, very practical problem that I see coming up more and more, and maybe it will get bigger, and we don't have a crystal ball, right, to see exactly what the market will do, but is that agents that work like really autonomous, right? And we have all these checks that I also described, right? And so they're hooking and asking and questioning and, you know, redoing prompts after prompt. I mean, this is generating so many tokens. What I see, like I have teams already that are maxed out at the beginning of the week, right? Like they are like day two of their work week, and they are like done with their budget, right? So I think, I mean, it's a very different take on that question, right? But it's definitely something I think teams should think about, right? Like maybe also local machines or local AI. It's not that powerful yet, right? It's a very different way of working. It's like back 2 years when everything was very painful. Hopefully this will also change, right? But I mean, this is also a reality that we have to deal with, right? That tokens get more expensive, you know, there are additional planned increases, you know, in what actually AI costs, right? And the things that we are talking about, the things that I see are needed, that agent and agentic really works smoothly. This is like a token eating machine, right? Like
Yeah.
this consumes a lot of tokens, and it's not in reach for every company, right, or for every developer.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
Uber just-
true. Like the
No, go ahead,
target, the dark factory model, the target spend is $1,000 per developer a day. And this all comes from Silicon Valley, right? Where dev salaries are higher and like they're talking about the 996. And I think for most like normal companies, that's completely out of band. But also coming back to the other things that we've been talking about, like the guardrails and the training, you know, like there are lower cost models. And I do think it is possible if you have built your guardrails and you have you can move to a way where, for example, your most expensive plan, like Claude, is supervising one of these lower cost ones. Like Dan Shapiro wrote this blog post about how he built some kind of video thing for his camera, but he used a lower cost model. He just used a tricycle, right? Which is something that does an intense like plan, build, test, validate. And so even though he used this lower cost model, he was able to build something very usable. And I'm very inspired by this. Like I use the tricycle for harder problems myself, but I'm also, existing in one of those places where I don't think we're going to want to just like kind of go up into the right on Claude tokens forever. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to view this, whatever it is, $100 plan as the limit. And when we start really hitting that consistently, I'm going to say, how did this plan is going to become the supervisor, and these lower cost things are going to become the implementers.
Yeah, and we're seeing that in the market writ large. I think Uber just publicly stated yesterday or the day before that they're not able to draw a straight line from token spend to actual business value. And I actually was with a large oil and gas customer yesterday in their London offices, and they said to me the era of cheap AI ended in Q1 2026, right? And that is informing their move to consolidate a variety of different AI tools. In the last year, I was speaking with a financial services customer. They were bringing in Claude Code, Codex, and every coding agent on the market to really see what would work. And that's when the tokens themselves were subsidized by the model providers. And now we're starting to see that flip of the switch and the consolidation occur.
Yeah, and I agree what Kate said and also Eric, but this takes time, right? Like it's not something that comes out of the box similar to the AI harness that has to, you have to take into consideration those considerations around cost don't come out of the box. People have to, like the discussion definitely started already, but I think there is more to do.
I think it also takes a level of expertise, right? Like, if you were like, I'm going to get started with AI today, but I don't want to pay a subscription. I'm going to use this like other thing. Well, the UX is going to be worse. You're not going to learn some things. You're probably going to have a really bad time. But and so I think, this panel called the high cost of AI immaturity, like there is this portion of AI immaturity that is just expensive. And if you pick the wrong metrics and you don't build your expertise mindfully, then it's going to stay really expensive. And I'm kind of seeing this period as much more of like, I need to learn as much as I can so that I can figure out how to do it in a cost-effective way soon. I spent months on the $20 Claude plan, and my partner was trolling me, my collaborator was trolling me, and I was like, no, I need to understand what everything costs. And eventually I lost patience. I upped my plan. I went on an absolute tear, but I really value that time because it really taught me like, what do I need to do what? Like if I have to actually budget with this token spend, like what's really important, what's not, what's too expensive to be worth it. And I think this metric of like, just like token spend as a vanity metric, I think is stupid. One, because it doesn't correlate to output, but I think it's kind of second order stupid because it doesn't actually teach us how to be effective with this thing that is ultimately going to be more expensive than it is today.
Yeah,
Maybe I
100%.
have to add something, sorry. No, Simon, go ahead.
No, it's mostly like I would really love before we finish to talk a bit more about way of working and the other aspect that we haven't touched on. So if it's okay, Michaela, it's okay if I move.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I think what we haven't touched a lot on is what this transformation look like from a human perspective. And quite a few of you think hard about this problem. So I want to make sure that it has enough space. So I'll give an example. For me, for example, social proof is very powerful. I had a team that kind of like, it went from, kind of like sporadic to routine usage of AI. And it did it because it did like a sort of like a workshop together. And then they told every other team that they start using it in a different way. So for me, social proof is very important. So I'm wondering from you, what is the lightest touch intervention you ever seen unlock the most behavioral change? So, because again, this is behavior. So, Kate, looking at you for this one to start with.
First, on a team level, I think anything that gets implemented for the good of the team and in a way where it runs automatically. So at my last job, I had my teams running AI code review from like the start of 2025. And it was like, we tried it and it actually found something on a God level developer. And the team was like, okay, if it has value to this guy, it has value to the rest of us. And so we adopted that early. And it was very useful. And then, you know, anytime, I think the people that I noticed most kind of working with it early on, this is what they were using it for. They were like taking problems that would benefit the team, but nobody was bothering to do it. And they were using AI to move those forward on the side. And then they were checking it in. So there was none of this preciousness about, oh, this code is bad, because I think everybody knew they weren't going to write it themselves, you know? And so I think that, like, and this is what I would encourage any manager to do if you're thinking about how to drive AI adoption on your team, is to be like, what things would benefit the team, and show the team that it has value. On an individual level, I think the biggest unlock is mindset, right? Many individual developers right now are feeling this identity threat, this skill threat, this stress of like, what does this mean for my job security, the industry, and mass layoffs, top-down mandates, you know, the kind of incident level, the reliability issues, like these are not helping. And this is the work that Jean and I do on DOI Your Career. We have a Navigating the I Shift course, and module 1 is just like, what is your mindset about this, and what do you want your mindset to be? You know, how can you find a sense of confidence in your skills and yourself that you can navigate this mindset? And so every time I review one of these documents, I see somebody's mindset shift. And I think this is really underdone work. And I think a lot of the problem that like some organizations are having is because they've used all the sticks. And they're like, why are the sticks not working? But this person is there having a huge like identity challenge, you know, and does not have a safe space to work through it.
Thank you. Thank you. Then on the same sort of like on the same area, maybe we hear more that to be effective, we need to rethink our way of working from the ground up. I mean, at least this is what they're telling me. It's kind of like, well, if we just do what we used to do just with AI, it's not going to work. But this is hard from a social perspective, and so I'm wondering, is there an alternative? I mean, or this is the only way, is to really like, ground zero and restart from scratch? Michaela.
Yeah, well, change is hard, right? Like it's hard on humans, we know it. But I think that the current environment, and Kate already said that a little bit, it's stick approaches, right? Carrot and stick approaches. They make it especially hard, right? We see a lot of media coverage and also CEOs, vocal CEOs and CTOs or whatnot, right? Talking about how AI can do it all, right? Like we can get rid of you. You see these layoffs and so on, right? So we are not only changing in a very positive environment. I think a lot of the changes are happening in a very frightful environment, be it true or not, right? Like, but I think as an organization, the first thing that I would do as an organization, as a team, right? Think about, the foundation that we have, and that have to be our values, right? So our values should actually not change. And hopefully the values are around the humans, right? And that we value the human and the work that they're doing. We are valuing and honoring the human experience, right? And I think this is probably the first thing that I would work on, and not the individual that has, to change their perspectives on it, but really the organization, the team should value the developers and the work that they're doing. And I think this is the foundation for people to actually be able to change in a good way. And here I'm again saying not, changing so that they, do whatever metric, was the target you're setting so that they're reaching that, but that they find out, that they experiment, they talk about, and shifting their ways. And here you said like from the ground up, yeah, there are drastic changes, but we don't have to do that from the ground up and not immediately, right? We can have deliberate and evolve gradually, right? And really take the humans on the way, right? On the journey. This is what I do with the workshops, right? Whenever I do a workshop, one of the goals is not only learning, but also behavioral change, right? And what I have seen over the years is that it only works when you can take the people with you on the journey, right? So that you really listen to their friction points, right? To their problems, maybe why they are skeptic about it, right? If I just say, oh, you have to use it more, that's not gonna help them. Or you do it in that way, right? Very often people not only resist change because out of, no reason, but they have reasons, right? They have their way of working. And if you solve it with them together, right, this can really bond strongly. That's what I probably would do, yeah.
Well, and that shows the importance of the qualitative aspect of that developer experience survey that you mentioned, right, via DevX or other players in the market, right? Is sure, you can have a quantitative number as it relates to developer productivity and experience, but that qualitative measurement will really help you understand what those behavioral changes are that are needed.
Yeah. And I mean, I find it, because you said Uber, right? I found it funny that first it was like, oh, we can get rid of all of you, not Uber now, but in general, like the message came through from some players, right? And it's like, oh, maybe it doesn't work out that well. Maybe we are slightly rehiring. But that's not nice, right? Like when I work with teams, for example, in my workshops, the best teams, right? The best teams are the ones that have a very positive, strong work culture, right? That love their company, that treats them well, that have often a lot of freedom, but they are the ones that are picking up on ideas, right? They take that learning, they put it into practice. They have discussions with each other, right? This is really what psychological safety also looks like, right? And we know that this is so foundational for everything that we have, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you wrote a playbook of like how not to do change management, it would look like a lot of the AI shift. Like, if the CIA was like, "Oh, we're going to take down this industry," like this is the playbook they would write, right? And I think but kind of coming back to the main question, one of the things I was reading yesterday is that there's like a U curve in terms of small organizations being able to see gains, large organizations being able to see gains, and the medium-sized ones are having the hardest time. And my take as to why is because of workflow homogeneity, right? And so small teams tend to have homogeneous workflows because they work together and they have this sense of sharing and community and psychological safety. And they say, this is what's working for me, you try it. And their bar for experimentation tends to be lower, right? And large companies tend to have homogeneous workflows just through necessity, right? You're going to make that many people effective, you're going to pretty much mandate the way they work. And medium-sized companies have this wild west of like everyone gets to do their own thing, some things are mandated, some things are not. And like I think that heterogeneity maybe helped them in the before times, but now is really holding them back, because I do see in my work that AI adoption benefits from homogeneous workflows.
Well, Kate, you'd be surprised to learn as well that even the largest enterprises, name brands that we would know, still have that heterogeneous developer experience. And they come to centralize to us and other players to centralize and say, hey, I want to standardize developer experience across full-time employees and third-party contractors as well. So it's very much a movement that we're seeing in the market writ large to get that standardization done.
And I want to add here something, because what I really find important is that on one hand, I think consolidation and standardization and centralizing things is really important. I worked at Microsoft and our team was responsible for exactly that, right? But I think it's also so important to leave leeway to the individual, right? To the person and their needs and how their brain maybe works, how their brain wiring is, right? Their habits. And not completely dictate exactly how you have to do things, right? So you have to have and a lot of even large corporations have to do still a lot of work to get their systems, right, consolidated, their technology is consolidated, right? But don't get rigid on the work, the ways people can actually work and interact with tools, because there's also research, for example, on neurodiversity, and a lot of engineers are actually neurodivergent, right? That they just work with the IDE, for example, differently, right? That they have different ways of processing information. So I think if we are getting too prescriptive of how that should actually work for every individual, that's also a dangerous road to go down.
I mean, I think this is where small teams have the edge, is that they can have both the homogeneity and the experimentation. And this is why AI adoption on any kind of larger company becomes a much, much harder problem. And I think it is really clear today, like if you are building an organization from the ground up, you would do it in a very different way in this era than you would have done it 5 years ago. But if you have an organization that you built 5 years ago, or however long it was, how do you retrofit it onto it, given that nobody really knows exactly how it's going to look like yet. We're still in the throes of this change. And I do think that is genuinely a hard problem. And then there's a moral question of how you're going to come at it, right? So to Michaela's point, are you going to prioritize like psychological safety and the things that actually support change management? Or to my earlier point, right, are you going to kind of come with the financial statement as the big stick, right? And I think engineers should understand the financial statement, right? But it doesn't mean that I morally agree with that approach.
Yeah. And I think I need to wrap up, I'm afraid. I wish we had an hour and a half because we only scratched the surface. So probably there are quite a few fast questions that we will go in now and respond to Slack. But in general, like to summarize it, I think we realize this is not an easy problem to solve. However, there are a couple of things that are emerging. One, that probably like tooling is a key part of the puzzle, but also the way we handle this, that is a transformation or behavioral change, is equally important. And probably like not overdoing your metrics as targets is also like a third piece. Thank you so much for joining. So we will now go in the Slack channel, respond to all your questions. And thank you very much for you all to join this panel. I really appreciate that.
It was
Thank
a
you.
pleasure. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.